Learning How to Listen. Conference by Samael Aun Weor. First of all, it is necessary to learn how to listen. Very rare, indeed, are those who know how to listen. Generally, when someone listens, they are not listening because their ego, translates everything it hears into its own language, according to its own psychological idiosyncrasy, according to its own criteria. In short, they are not listening. In order to learn how to listen, people must first awaken the consciousness. How can anyone with a sleeping consciousness listen psychologically? In order to know how to listen, one must be present, and I ask myself and you as well, you who are here, are you sure that in this moment you are not in the process of roaming around your house, your workplace, or in the country, or in some place that you like? We always see people sitting, apparently listening, but how can anyone listen when they are not at home? Generally, when we speak of gnosis, those who are apparently listening are not listening at all. They're rushing around, hither and thither, all over their inner psychological city. Let us remember that within each of us there is a psychological country, a psychological city. A place in the physical world is one thing, and the psychological place where we are situated is another. In which place are we situated now? You are going to say, here. Perhaps it is true, perhaps not. The reality is that knowing how to listen is difficult, because generally, the person who is listening runs away, traveling across their psychological country, escaping in any which direction. In short, they are not at home, and if they are not at home, who will listen? The human personality? Truly, it does not know how to listen. The physical body? It is nothing more than an instrument. Who then will listen? When we speak of the teachings to another person, and this, I say particularly to our missionaries, we must be careful, because people run away when they are listening to us. Or when they are apparently listening to us, they are not at home. There are also people who are full of themselves. These people do not want to listen to the word. They have no free space, no little space for our words. They are full of themselves, of their presumptions, of their pride, of their vanity, of their theories, etc. So, the word does not know where to enter. Where can it enter if these people are full of themselves? Let us remember Jesus and his birth. His parents went to Bethlehem for the census decreed by Herod. They could not find any free space at the inn. Similarly, in our inner tavern, if we could call it thus, there is no free space for the word, the tavern, the inn is occupied. How grave this is! We have to hold the Buddha's bowl, the pot, upwards so as to receive the Christic word. But instead of this, people turn their bowls downwards. We must recognize our own nothingness, our inner misery, so that a space remains in the receptacle, in the bowl. A space, yes, for the word. But so long as we are full of ourselves, how can the word penetrate into us? In other words, how can we learn to listen from a psychological point of view? Because knowing how to listen logically, or knowing how to listen physically, let us say, is something relatively easy. But knowing how to listen psychologically, how difficult it is. It is necessary to have a receptive attitude with the bowl upwards, waiting for nourishment, with the receptacle or bowl held in the Buddhist way. But if the bowl is turned downwards, then how can the nourishment enter us? How can we receive it? Those who are filled with pride and self-sufficiency, those who are stuffed with theories, do you believe that they are in the appropriate state for receiving the word? First of all, we must recognize our own nothingness and our inner misery before we can receive the nourishment of the word, and it is not possible to receive this nourishment if we do not know how to listen. We have heard the word thousands, even millions of times, and we believe that we know it, that we have heard it, but really and truly, we have not listened to the word. On a day amidst others, we listen to it again and it hits us all over again. But if we have already heard it thousands of times, why does it hit us again? It's because we have always listened to it with our consciousness asleep, but on that day, we had the chance to listen to it with the consciousness awakened and it hit us, as if it were something new. You see how difficult it is to know how to listen, you see just how laborious it is. It is necessary, above all else, to be conscious if we want to know how to listen. Let us remember the temptation of Jesus in the desert. When Satan said to him, "All these kingdoms of the world I will deliver unto you, if thou wilt bow down and worship me." This is temptation. So, Jesus was being asked to turn the bowl downwards, instead of turning it upwards in order to receive the inner word which comes from the highest. He was asked to turn it downwards to listen to external things, to listen, therefore, to the world of the external senses. But Jesus did not fall. Why did the great Kabir Jesus not fall? Because he was always alert and vigilant, like the sentinel during times of war. He held his bowl facing upwards and not facing down. He awaited the nourishment. But if he had succumbed to temptation, that is to say, if he had turned his receptacle, his bowl, downwards, he would have heard the external words, things that come from outside, things of the physical world, and he would not have been able to listen psychologically. And so, my beloved brothers and sisters, we must always become more receptive to the word. We must learn to listen psychologically. But I repeat, how can we listen if we are not at home? In order to listen, we must be at home. Which people are not at home? All the unconscious people, of course. Can you be sure that you are listening to me in this moment? Can you certify this? Can you confirm to me, swear to me in this moment that you are entirely here and that you are not in the process of wandering around somewhere else? The harsh reality of the facts is that once people start listening, they don't listen, because they're wandering around outside. They are not in there at home, they're wandering around outside. Why do people not remember their past existences? But how could they remember if they were not at home? Can anyone, by chance, remember what they have not experienced? Being at home. Who knows what being at home means? I am referring to this house, to the human person. Generally, the being is wandering around outside the house, so how can we remember our past existences if we have always been outside our house? There are two crucial things in our Gnostic studies. Firstly, self-remembering, that is to say, remembering our own being, and, secondly, the relaxation of the body. Remembering oneself and relaxing the body, we must do this continually. Remember that the body is always in a state of tension. The nerves are tense, the muscles. We must learn to remember ourselves and to relax the body. I do it continually, all day long, self-remembering and relaxation of my body, whether it's in an armchair, in a bed, or wherever it may be. It is indispensable, during the day, to remember ourselves more and more, that is to say, to remember our own being. Really and truly, due to the forgetting of the being, people commit many errors and are filled with very erroneous theories. If Laplace, the great French astronomer and mathematician, had not forgotten himself, if he had not forgotten his own being, he would never have conceived this theory in his mind, the famous Laplace theory, this completely absurd, false theory. When Laplace presented his theory to Napoleon Bonaparte, explaining to him how a planet or a solar system came out of a nebula, Napoleon said, "And what role have you left to God?" Cynically, Laplace answered, "No, sir, I did not need God for my hypothesis." See the self-sufficiency. It is precisely for this reason, because he forgot his deep inner being, that he was able to develop this theory, this false theory. Because no astronomer of planet Earth has ever seen with their own eyes a planet coming out of or emerging from a nebula. And so, this is not proven. However, many ignoramuses have accepted it as a dogma of faith. If Laplace had not forgotten himself, he would not have developed this absurd theory. One day, an ignoramus dripped a drop of oil into a glass of water. With a spatula, he decided to make the drop of oil turn. He formed rings that continued to turn around the central drop. So, he said, this is how the universe was formed. And so what? And God, he was asked. I didn't need God, look at how it formed. But how ridiculous. He doesn't realize that in his theory, he is playing the role of God. With this movement, he is causing this oil to turn, causing the drops of oil to turn around the central nucleus. But he is so foolish that he doesn't realize an intelligence was needed to move his hand, that he played a role, because the drop of oil would not have turned on its own, or dispersed into rings. A hand was required to make it move, an intelligent impulse. But this cynic, this fool, plays the role of God, and at the same time, he denies God. People are stupid like this when they forget themselves. As for me, thanks be to God, I have not forgotten myself, my own being. This is why I say that Laplace's nebula, this nebulous theory, is false. I will go further. I am with Sababath, with Sabavat. What is that? You will say. Diamahath, in affirming this. I am committing no crime. It is the guiding intelligence, formed, let us say, by the Sabaoth, by the army of the word. How did the universe emerge? From a nebula? Certainly not. Do not tell lies. It emerged from the Sabavat, from the mother substance, chaos, the Mula Prakriti. As the Hindus would say, this is evident. It is certain that certain rituals, tantric, naturally, were celebrated at the dawn of the Mahamanvantara. Certainly, the Elohim, who together constitute the Sabaoth, the army of the word, divided themselves in the manner of the divine androgyne. And by dividing themselves into male-female, they became ready to fertilize the chaotic matter. This is how Isis and her masculine principle exercised a chemical, metaphysical copulation in order to fertilize the chaotic matter, to fertilize Sababath, chaos. Then they separated the superior waters of chaos from the inferior waters. The superior waters were fertilized by the fire. They rose through the spinal column of Isis, in a collective sense. They were fertilized by the eternal masculine principle, by the fire. Thereafter, they returned to the chaos, so that the chaos could in turn be fertilized, and so emerged life, so emerged the seedbed of all that is, was and shall be. The atomic whirlwind was produced everywhere. Then, the seeds of existence, the elemental atoms, the elemental seeds emerged, the worlds emerged, with all their forms of life. All of this thanks to the Elohim or the divine androgynes, or, to speak more clearly, to the army of Elohim. But there was no nebula. The first form which arose into existence was the mental universe. Much later, it crystallized into an astral form, and into an etheric form, and finally, it took a physical form. But there was no nebula, as Laplace said. Everything was a product of the verb, everything was a product of the word. If Laplace had not forgotten himself, if, instead of developing his theory, he had engaged in meditation, it is clear that he would have been able, one day, to discover the origins of the universe, which are very far from the theories he developed. This is the harsh reality of the facts. So when we forget ourselves, we commit horrible, terrible errors. Forgetting ourselves is the gravest. Fire is what matters in any creation, but fire is one thing in the physical world, and another in the chaos. Evidently, in the chaos, fire is an electric power which has the possibility of awakening in order to create. These days, we are in the process of working with the Pistis Sophia. And I say that Pistis Sophia in the chaos is a crucial thing. Really, Sophia is the wisdom of the fire, and she shines in the chaos. It is with good reason that we say, light comes from darkness and that the cosmos comes from chaos. As fire, Pistis Sophia shines in the chaos to create and recreate anew. Divine wisdom is in the chaos, and from the chaos it can spring forth to reach the 13th aeon. The 13th serpent, the number 13 serpent. And so, my dear brothers and sisters, we must always reflect. More. Great things open up for us when we do not forget our being. When we remember profoundly. I advise the brothers and sisters to remember themselves daily. Whether it be for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, or an hour. That, sitting in a chair, they relax their bodies completely. One day they will be able to reach the experience of reality by this path, which is a way of working on the emotional center by means of the motor center. One then adopts this attitude of the mind, in full relaxation, which lives the being, feeling it, experiencing it, being receptive to the being. This is fundamental. The personality must become more and more passive and receptive to the word which comes from above, from the highest. This word comes through the superior centers of the being and reaches the mind. But if we are not receptive, if we do not learn how to relax ourselves, and if we forget ourselves, how can we receive the messages which come through the superior centers of the being? In what way? The brothers and sisters must understand this. They must learn how to receive the word, how to grasp its profound meaning. This is fundamental. Every day, we must relax ourselves and remember ourselves, remember our own being, and thus, we will move forward triumphantly. Now, if a brother or a sister wants to ask a question, he or she can do so with total freedom. Everyone has the right to ask. Anyone can ask questions without going off topic. Go ahead, brother. Disciple, this means, venerable master, that when a student is not remembering themselves, it is useless to consult a master to resolve a situation, a problem, because they will not know how to listen. Master, consulting is necessary, but knowing how to listen is indispensable. And so, it is not absurd to consult. Not knowing how to listen is absurd. Is there another question? Disciple, can we learn to listen through speech education? Master, speaking is one thing, listening is another. If we do not know how to listen, we will not have true understanding. In order to listen, it is necessary to be alert and vigilant, to be conscious. There must also be a perfect balance between knowing and understanding, or between knowledge and the being. But listening is one thing and speaking is another. Speech education is good, I'm not saying otherwise, but it is indispensable to know how to listen. This is what we are mainly talking about this evening, the science of listening. Any other questions, brother? Disciple, master, when we are face to face with you, there is a kind of numbness of the mind. It is like we are incapable of absorbing all the words of the master, absorbing all the transcendental knowledge. That is to say, we remain perplexed, dazed in front of the wisdom of the master, in such a way that it is difficult to listen to you. So, what could I do to learn how to listen to you, venerable master? Master, I have heard your words. Indubitably, it is necessary to know how to listen. It is necessary to be in a state of alert perception or ready for the unexpected if we want to listen. But I repeat, how can anyone who is not in his house know how to listen? Normally, people who listen to a lecturer in an auditorium have the habit of escaping. They have multiple inhuman psychic aggregates which come and go in all directions. The result, they are in the auditorium, listening, but they are not there. They listen without listening, because they are not at home. If we want to know how to listen, we must be whole, unitotal, facing the lecturer. The three centers, intellectual, emotional, and motor, must be integrated, united. But if these three centers are dissociated, the intellect on one side, the emotional on another, and the motor on yet another, then we are not listening to the word. And so, knowing how to listen is a very difficult and fundamental thing, because if we learn how to listen, we can then receive complete information on the Gnostic esoteric work. We must take into account that practical life has a lot of strength. Life and the state of unconsciousness have a terrible strength. It would seem that life and the state of unconsciousness of humanity have even more strength than the Gnostic esoteric knowledge. But what's happening is that people are so full of themselves, I repeat, that they cannot receive the information we give them through the word. They are full, they do not receive the complete information, that is to say, they do not know how to listen. They are full of themselves. If someone listens, if they learn how to listen, in a state of alert perception, on the qui-vive, they also come to know, by means of the data they receive, by means of the word informing them, they come to discover that really they are unfortunate, bare, miserable, and starving. An empty place remains so that the word may enter. But so long as we feel full, so long as we feel presumptuous, proud, satisfied with all these egos, how will we receive the word? There is no free space within the person so that the word may be stored. We must therefore make it so that our pitcher, our receptacle, our bowl, is turned upwards, open, awaiting the word, the nourishment which will feed us, which will orient us. But if we turn the bowl downwards, how will it receive? It will not receive. It is necessary to turn it back upwards and leave an empty space to receive this droplet, this drop which is knowledge. Go ahead, brother. Disciple, false education and false morality, are they also obstacles for knowing how to listen? Master, well, certainly, false education does a lot of harm. I say that the education we receive in primary and secondary schools and in university is false, because it is in no way related to any of the autonomous and auto-conscious parts of the being. In being false, it effectively falsifies the 5 cylinders of the machine and feeds many inhuman psychological aggregates. An individual with a well-reinforced false personality is an individual who is not disposed to know how to listen, who does not know how to listen. They always listen to the subjective, infraconscious, infrahuman voices of the 5 centers of the organic machine. The only voices they know how to listen to are those of the false personality. They are always so stuffed with knowledge that they do not leave an empty space where an instructor or a guru could deposit the word. And so, false education is horribly prejudiced, and as for false morality, I do not know which morals you are referring to. Disciple, to the moral, let us say, which is used in the no. Attached, of course, to what is written, to the tradition. Master, this serves no purpose. We are talking about revolutionary ethics. Because morality is a slave to customs and locations, to epochs. What is moral in one country is immoral in another. Something that was moral during one epoch is immoral in another epoch. That which is moral at a certain moment is immoral at another moment. We will look at a concrete case. In China, for example, up until a little while ago, killing one's own father because he was very old was considered moral, and giving newborn girls to Catholic missionaries who arrived there, in exchange for postage stamps, was normal. There was a priest who brought back more than 100, or more than 1,000 little girls that he had acquired in exchange for simple postage stamps. It's normal. Maybe they threw a little girl out in the street, because she was a girl. Since she was a woman, she had no value, they would throw her in the streets. People only rejoiced when a boy was born. But when a girl was born, they would get rid of her or exchange her for postage stamps. And so, why do we remain stuck on morality? Morality is a slave to customs. We could cite thousands of cases, some very painful, even shameful, of such highly praised morality. And so, morality is a slave to customs, to times. It is the result of all the prejudices of humanity. It is useless. Whoever wants to walk on the path of the intimate auto-realization of the being must free themselves from morality. Let us speak rather of revolutionary ethics. This makes more sense. We must learn to do an inventory of ourselves, in order to know what we are missing and what we have too much of, and also learn how to use our virtues. A virtue, as holy as it is, can do harm if it is not in its place. There are many saints who have harmed humanity with their virtues. It is the harsh reality of the facts. However, virtues are precious, but he who does not know how to handle them can evidently do a lot of damage with these virtues. Let us not speak therefore of morality. Let us speak of revolutionary ethics. Morality is useless. It harms our development. Are there any other questions? Go ahead, brother. Disciple, master, clearly it is necessary to know how to listen. And it is necessary to be in at home in order to be able to listen. Could you now talk to us about the bad secretary? Master, it is the ego, nothing less than the ego. Everyone acts in accordance with their psychological idiosyncrasy. The result, when a lecturer has finished talking, the ego has formed its own erroneous concept, because it is founded on prejudices, fears and false theories, on false education received, etc. The bad secretary does a lot of harm. This is why we must be alert and vigilant, open to receiving the word, attentive and present. If we are absent, how can we receive it? I repeat, why don't people remember their past existences? Simply because they were never present, they were never at home. The body dies, and they were never at home. How can we remember our past lives if we are not at home? Disciple, Master, could you talk to us about the relationship that exists between knowing how to listen and prayer? Does the Bible not say, "When you pray, go into your room and ask your Father who is in secret will answer you"? So, knowing, from the beginning, knowing how to pray and knowing how to listen are important? Master, the question that the brother V asks is very interesting. Certainly, knowing how to pray and knowing how to listen are important, but one must know how to pray. This is the difficulty. First of all, it must be known that there are four basic states of consciousness. Firstly, the total unconsciousness of the individual submerged in his bed. The ego wanders in the inner worlds just as unconscious as the body it has left. Secondly, the unconsciousness of the individual who has awoken and gotten out of bed. They continue with the same dreams they had when their body was in a passive state, with the only difference being that now the body is active for the dreams. In these two inhuman or infrahuman states, it is impossible to perform a prayer correctly. In order to perform a prayer correctly, it is necessary to call upon a third state of consciousness, the remembering of oneself, of one's own being. When we concentrate on the Father who is in secret with the Lord's Prayer, "Our Father who art in heaven," we must perform a conscious prayer in order to get a conscious response. If we do the Lord's Prayer, we must first concentrate on our own deep inner Lord, our being, not on an anthropomorphic, dogmatic God, like in many dead sects, no, but rather on the superior part of our own being. This transcendental part is the Father we carry deep within. It is towards Him that we must direct ourselves. The prayer must be reflexive. After the self-remembering of our Lord, who is our own deep inner being, we will meditate on each conscious word of the Our Father, on each part, word for word, phrase by phrase, while trying to understand the profound meaning. Once the prayer is finished, we relax ourselves even more, and, in a passive, receptive state, with the mind quiet and in profound silence, we wait for our Father's word to come. If we succeed in listening to Him, if He gives us the answer, the prayer was done well. But if we do not succeed in listening to Him, this means that the prayer was done poorly, incorrectly. Each of us must learn to speak with the Father who is in secret, face to face, in deep quietude and in silence. Thus, we must understand what prayer is. We must bring the word from the Most High down to us. This word comes to us through the superior centers of the being. But we must be in a receptive state to hear it. That is all. Yes, brother. Disciple, Master, often, as you said at the beginning, certain words touch us more deeply than others. At this moment, is there a formula or a way to grasp more, for longer, or any way to force the mind? In our psychological world, is there any formula, any way to extend it? Master, complete conscious attention. If we do not have complete conscious attention, then we are wandering from one place to another while listening. And so, while listening, we are not listening.